Well, of course, being the world's largest economy in terms of GDP, a slowdown in the US affects us all, wherever we live and work. Joining us now from London, Bilal Hafeez, Chief Executive of the Macro Hive. Bilal, good to have you with us. Is the US headed for a recession?
I think right now, I would say no, but things could change very quickly. Of course, we saw that very poor labour market report that you mentioned. However, when you look at other data points, for example, we recently had what's called the ISM services data, which is a survey of companies in the services sector in the US, and that actually increased over the previous month. Also, when you look at personal income on a broader basis, that is not falling, which is a sign that we're not in a recession. So right now, my base case is I don't think we are headed into a recession, say, over the next 3 to 6 months, but things could change very quickly, and we do have to be sensitive to the data that we're seeing unfold.
So are voters in pre-election polling right now right to say they trust Trump more on the economy than Harris?
Well, in general, you tend to find the public tends to support Republicans on the economy more than Democrats. That's been true across many decades, even before Trump. So in general, that often tends to be the case. In terms of whether Trump or the Democrats could cause a recession, my sense is neither side will necessarily be the crucial factor about tipping the US into a recession. Instead, it'll be much more about the dynamics of what the Fed does. Does the Fed cut rates to help stabilize the economy? Do companies cut back spending or not? And these things are out of the hands of what we're seeing on the electoral side right now.
Has the Fed been too slow to cut interest rates? Would you expect perhaps an emergency cut before September, or at the very least a signal that they intend to cut in September?
Well, I think already they have, at their last press conference at the recent FOMC meeting, they did seem to suggest that they will cut in September. The question now for markets is whether that will be a 25 basis point cut or a 50 basis point cut, or whether, as you say, it will be an emergency cut. My sense at the moment is that I think that they will not do an emergency cut. Instead, I think they will likely cut in September. Now, how large that cut will be, I think, will depend more on the economic data than, say, what we're seeing in financial markets, because we have seen in recent years a decoupling between the performance of, say, equity markets and the performance of the economy. So I think it's all about whether we see another weak labour market report in the coming few months. If we do, then that increases the chances of a much larger cut in September.
We'll talk some more about that in just a moment. But first, back to Kamala Harris. Do we know what her planned economic policies will be, or it will just be a continuation of the Biden-Harris economic policies?
It's a great question. And so far, she hasn't really said much about the economic policy, apart from sort of general statements about trying to lift up the middle class and so on, which are general talking points that we see. But in terms of specific policies, she has not articulated anything right now. She will likely articulate those at the Democratic National Convention, the DNC. But more generally, if you look at the tone of her electioneering so far, she seems to be focusing much more on the tone and culture and optimism rather than being too specific about policy. So it's not clear whether she will necessarily articulate a clear policy agenda. So for now, it seems like she could continue the Biden policies that we've seen in earlier years. And at this stage, we don't really know whether she will deviate from that much.
But if the numbers continue to go against her, if unemployment continues to rise, that's not going to be good for her electoral prospects, is it?
Absolutely. She has somewhat of a challenge here because we've had a period of inflation, which led to lower approval ratings for the Democrats, for Biden, when he was the candidate for the Democrats. And just as inflation's falling, we're seeing a rise in unemployment. So it seems like Kamala's has a big challenge here because she could have argued that they've defeated inflation, but just as that's happening, unemployment is rising. So this will be a big challenge. And so it perhaps is for this reason that she may not necessarily focus as much on the economy. Instead, she'll focus on other issues, whether it's female reproductive rights, whether it's democracy, whether it's general principles of freedom and so on. So I think the economy will be a hard platform for her to run on.
Bilal, I'll be back with you in just a moment. Fears of a sharp slowdown in the American economy triggered a global stock market sell-off. Equities have now, for the most part, bounced back, but the market remains volatile. Indices across the US, Asia and Europe fell sharply over fears that the US Federal Reserve had been too slow to cut interest rates and respond to signs of a weakening economy. Japanese stocks were hit by the largest losses. An interest rate hike, a rare one in Japan, is also believed to have played a role in that. Bilal, is this stock market volatility set to continue?
I think at this stage, one can't rule it out. We have seen very extreme moves over the last week or so. And typically when you see such large moves, they do continue for some period ahead, but we may not necessarily see as large moves as we've seen over the past week. One challenge we have right now is we are in the summer months of the Northern Hemisphere, where you tend to see that there's less active traders and investors in the market, which tends to result in outsized moves in markets. So that's also exacerbating a lot of the moves we're seeing at the moment. Moreover, we have seen certain bubbles been forming in markets. So, for example, we've had a mini AI bubble in the US. We've also had a mini sort of Japan bubble in the Nikkei and also the yen carry trade. And all of these bubbles are unwinding at the moment. And it's hard to know exactly when the bursting of those bubbles will end. But we do think that we're not out of the woods yet.
Bilal, it's always great to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Thank you.